Honestly, this is a topic I think that should probably be talked about a lot more, but unfortunately it doesn't, because it goes a lot in hand with what I've said before, that the left isn't really good when it comes to foreign policy. And even when it has come to general elections, foreign policy hasn't, shall we say, even been a deciding factor in many general elections. That's just the case. Even you might say, oh, but what about Brexit? Wasn't Brexit technically a big foreign policy objective? Yes, it was. But remember, the conversation around Brexit was not about what this impact would have on Britain from the outside. The conversations were all focused on the UK itself and its own internal, we'll put in big quotation marks, benefits that Brexit would bring. So that's where it was focused. Even then, with something that was meant to have, well, it has had big, political and foreign policy relations, no one's really understood the ramifications of what these, this would really mean. And I think now, given that you've got Trump on one end, Europe on another, and the UK in the middle, well, it looks like in terms when it comes to foreign policy, we've got some big things to decide. Very, very big things to decide. So before we do get talking more about that, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. Also, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one-off donation link where you can buy me coffee. There's the YouTube thank you button. And of course, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So thank you very much to everyone who does help and support the channel that way. So UK foreign policy. It was essentially really built on two pillars. And it was the idea that we had this great transatlantic bridge, that we had Washington on this side and we had Brussels on this side. And here we were in the middle, being the bridgehead between those two political entities. And that's where Britain's sort of allegiances and strategic Britain, sort of its strategic position was at that time. Now, the big problem, of course, is you've pretty much had, well, Boris Johnson blow up one side of that bridge, thanks to Brexit. But we'll say this. One of the big reasons why Rishi Sunak brought Cameron back in is because Rishi Sunak himself is not that good when it comes to foreign policy. So best bring in an expert. Hence why Cameron was one of the people who was chosen, because he couldn't really trust anyone else in his own party. Not only that, but we have seen that Sunak at least understands the importance of having good relations with Europe. That this wasn't a Boris Johnson type relationship where it was all going to be about just pure sabotage every single moment, dealing in complete delusional fantasy ideas. Sunak got the Windsor framework signed off and done, and at least knows that, it's not, shall we say, fully rebuilt. It's a very ropey bridge still, but at least there is a somewhat bridge-ish reconstructed. So our alliance, or at least our alliance as it stands currently with Europe, very, very shaky. And that's why I think you've seen David Lammy really focus and talk about, if you've heard him talk about what Labour's foreign policy should be, it's all focused on Europe and that rebuilding, that re-engaging with Europe, which is going to be something very, very good to look forward to. But of course, now comes the next problem, because on November 6th, we will finally learn who is going to be the next president of the United States. And I will tell you now, November is a very long time to hold your breath, because we know we've got a general election at, well, some point this year. We know that Rishi Sunak in his right mind would never have it in November. Like, there is not going to be a general election in November. I can guarantee you that. For the rest of the months, I can't say, but it ain't going to be November, because if Trump wins, then Britain will have to respond. Because with Trump's comments about the fact that he is like saying, we won't fulfill your commitments if you're not paying into NATO, we ain't gonna, you know, come and defend you. And even if he is, you know, blustering about this, the big problem is this massively undermines any deterrent. This undermines NATO completely. And this is why Emmanuel Macron has said, look, we need strategic independence, that we can't rely on the US. And you have seen this in Ukraine. It sharpened a lot of people's minds, going, right, we need to rebuild European defense industries. We need to rebuild, armies. And then this, of course, now comes into domestic policy in all these European countries. It's going to be coming in to UK policy, that if we do need to rebuild our, supply chains, our domestic armaments, etc., then we've got to get that money from somewhere. And I know before that I've said I think we should be 4%, because that 4%, we need to rebuild a lot of our military capacity. So it's not just having, soldiers and ships. It's about the ability to be able to produce the stuff that the soldiers, ships, and airplanes would need to fight a war. And that at the moment in Ukraine has been very, very much highlighted. The fact that when this war started, Germany came out and said, oh, at the rate, shells are being fired, we'd have run out of shells in 2 days. Like artillery shells. That's worrying. And the fact that you've got one factory that is supplying pretty much all of NATO, then that was also a bit of a strategic problem. Now, that does seem to be being alleviated a bit. We are seeing more artillery factories, more artillery production come online. So that is at least, a problem solved. But this, of course, doesn't solve the big strategic problem for the UK, in that you've got Donald Trump, continuing with our bridge analogy, that has pretty much wired this bridge to explode. And if one side of the bridge at the moment is pretty ropey, then what does this say about Britain's strategic alliances and who we should ally with? Because you've got right now Donald Trump, with his history in his first term presidency, throwing allies under the bus, left, right, and center. Could we seriously rely in a second Trump presidency if the UK came under attack? The unfortunate answer is probably not. That's very worrying. That is incredibly worrying on a lot of levels. Because you've just had the Estonian Prime Minister come out and say, look, Russia wants to prepare for a war with a NATO power within 10 years. Now, currently, of course, they're in Ukraine. And it's very clear that against Ukraine, there isn't a Western equipped, trained military. It was still in its sort of post-Soviet era, making that transition. It has sort of very much heavily failed, but it's still holding its own. So as much as we, should worry about that and things like that, alliances are very important. And this is a conversation I think we should be having more, because this, again, lends credence. We've talked a lot on this channel many, many times about it does not make, any economic or business sense for the UK to be outside of Europe. If you're looking at defense, political, geopolitics, it does not make any sense for the UK to be outside of that, of like the EU. That's why I think you are going to see Labour go a lot more and align a lot more with European interests. And then, as we've said before, eventually, we will end up back in the EU. So, but yeah, something to think about. What would happen? Because it is true at the moment that because of Trump, the Europe and the US are drifting further apart. And if Trump wins, and I know Scott on Labour Socialist said he's not worried about that, but I worry, and I've said before it will come down to turnout. I do worry about that. You know, November is a long time to hold your breath. So this will not be probably the last time we do a video talking about this or about how or what potentially could happen, of course, if Trump wins. So so yeah, like I say, it's a long time to hold your breath, folks, but I'm there with you on that. So as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.